Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Today's edition presents a roundup of the latest developments in the finding of a flying disc.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from New Mexico suggested that the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago. The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs, which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. In the meantime, General Ramey describes the object as being of flimsy construction, almost like a box type. He says that it was so battered that he was unable to determine whether it had a disc form, and he does not indicate its size. Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil.
I think at last count, I had spoken to around 4 dozen people who handled various aspects of the debris. The most dramatic is the foil-like material that you could wad up in a ball and let it go and it would unfold itself.
My dad would not have gotten excited over a weather balloon. He was not easily excitable, and this is the most thrilled I'd ever seen him in my life. He thought that was the most fantastic thing in the world.
Ray Santilli changed his story in 2006. Up until then, he said that what you see on the alien autopsy film is 100% genuine. That is it. Then he changed his story and said, well, it's not quite true. A lot of the film, when we took it out of the canister, had degraded, and we were only left with glimpses of it. So what we did, we restored it, in inverted commas. So what you actually see is a restoration, and he compared it to when you restore a painting or a fresco or an old tapestry or whatever. However, why did he make 2 alien autopsy films? Because there are 2. So why would you have to have 2 restorations? If you were restoring the Mona Lisa, you wouldn't do an extra one, would you? Just in case. But he still claims that he did visit a military cameraman back in 1992 while in the United States, And they did show him alien autopsy film, and that his story basically is true, and he's sticking to that.
What people don't appreciate is that if you go to any major gallery around the world and you see a Leonardo da Vinci, or you see any of these great works from the 14th, 15th century, a lot of those paintings have been touched up so many times that there's very little on the canvas that actually comes from the original artist, especially The Last Supper, you know, which has been repainted maybe 5 times over the last 400 years. But I don't want to take anything away from the original film. I don't, and the fact that what we did was a restoration of that film. And I still go back to the fact that we put it out there and we asked broadcasters that had so much money, I can't tell you, especially Fox, and say, look, you investigate it, you know, and they spent a fortune investigating it, and they weren't able to debunk the film at all, and over the years, apart from the fact that some people have come out and said they may have been involved, the film still maintains its integrity entirely. And with the release of the CIA papers recently, I think there's no doubt that what happened in 1947 is something that needs to be investigated, and people should really take seriously.
Well, in 2001, when these emails were generated, the alien autopsy film still hadn't been proven to be a hoax. UFO researchers in general accepted that it probably was a hoax, but Santilli was still sticking with his original story. He hadn't changed it at that point. So why Kit Green and others and Bigelow became interested in it is a mystery at the moment. I don't have an answer for that at all. When we look at US billionaire Robert Bigelow, he's had a long-running interest in UFOs and still does today. And Bigelow had an organization called National Institute of Discovery Sciences. He employed a number of scientists to work and study UFOs. And it was largely applauded by the UFO community, but there were always, you know, some people who were suspicious. The way I'd look at the memo is that if this is going to the boss, Mr. Bigelow himself, he's the man that, you know, presumably paid these gentlemen for their work. Would you really want to upset the apple cart? I don't know if you would or not. There could well be a possible conflict of interest, and that's something that I don't think's been taken into account. And it's something that I personally think could well be an explanation for the content, or part of the content at least, for this email. When we look at Ray's story today, there are still a number of people who believe that Ray is telling the truth and that the alien autopsy film was real. And Ray said that he was threatened by whoever, mysterious forces. It is true that at one point his offices were burgled, but mysteriously the film wasn't stolen. It was still left behind. So there was a burglary, I believe, at Ray's office. So he's used that to his own benefit to say, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, it wasn't a burglar, it was the powers that be, you know, the men in black. But there is no substance to this story, of course, and you know, people will believe what they want to believe. When we look back on the alien autopsy film and the various parts of it, Ray changed the story on a regular basis. First told us the tent footage was taken out in the desert. That was pulled. No, it was all a hoax. done on me. You're going to release all the footage. Well, all of the footage wasn't released. You have one autopsy released. Why won't you release the other one? Oh, well, the German investor who paid the money for it, he wants to keep that for himself. That was another change in the story. If you look at Ray's own leaflet that he produced to publicise his own video that he had for sale, on the back of it, it quite clearly says, I cannot verify any of this as being authentic, you know? So he's, you know, the story has changed down the years, and I dare say, you know, if it crops up again, it'll change again. We shall see. One of the misnomers about Ray Santilli and the Alien Autopsy film is that he will claim that Kodak verified the age. That is not true. Kodak only ever saw pieces of film that had the edge code on it, the edge code being a triangle and a square. Kodak informed him that that edge code was recycled every 20 years, was used in 1927, 47, or 1967. Kodak at no time did see any film with any image of either the creature or the debris film, so they never verified its authenticity. Ray Santilli recently, for example, claimed that Kodak wouldn't analyze the film because they didn't want to get involved in the controversy. This is not true. You know, I personally spoke with Kodak in the UK, which is in Hertfordshire. They would gladly have tested the film for its age. They would not have commented on what the film may or may not have shown, but they would have analysed it for its age. And what is ironic is that Ray Santilli didn't live that far away from them. He could have taken it around and delivered it, you know, in person. Kodak even said, we'll even get the British Film Institute involved, because they are experts in handling and restoring and, you know, commenting on old film. But none of that happened, of course.
My guess is that this was done by somebody strictly for money. I think eventually it will be shown to be a hoax, but by that time, Santilli will have collected his royalties from the different television companies throughout the world, and he will have made the majority of his sales of videos.
When the Alien Autopsy film came out and people started to label it as a hoax, there was a number of people who were worried that if it was proven to be a hoax, that some people would then assume that the whole Roswell story was a hoax. Well, that never happened. The two were separated right from the very beginning. What it did do, in fact, was raise the interest in Roswell, the Roswell case in general, and UFOs in general. The Alien Autopsy film, you know, made its way into popular culture. It was featured in the X-Files TV series, The Simpsons, Seinfeld. You can find, you know, recreations of it in museums in Japan. There was one in Blackpool, believe it or not. In the United States, they were even having alien autopsy cakes for Halloween. So it is firmly ingrained in popular culture and has not done any damage to the overall Roswell story at all. If anything, it's helped raise the interest in it. What happened at Roswell in 1947? That's a good question. Even the UFO researchers and the skeptics agree on one thing, that something did crash. Something did come down, something solid, something, you know, that you could pick up and hold in your hands. I was recently speaking to one of the main Roswell researchers. There's the name of Kevin Randall. Kevin has a long military career as a helicopter pilot, and he also has a PhD, but he is one of the leading Roswell researchers. Kevin did a sort of a cold case review, if you like, just recently of the evidence and the witnesses who claim to have seen bodies at Roswell. And he's come to the conclusion that it's not as solid as we might first have imagined. So for someone of Kevin's stature to do that and say that is quite a revelation. However, he went on to say that he could find no conventional explanation for what happened at Roswell, i.e. a rocket, a balloon, a mogul balloon, or anything else you can think of. He looked very hard to try and find a conventional explanation, but he couldn't find one. None that would match what the eyewitnesses were saying to him, and none that would, in his opinion, lead to the instigation of a cover-up. When you look at all the evidence for Roswell, I think it still remains a bit of an enigma. There is no evidence that can ultimately prove it was not of this earth. If it was there, wouldn't that be fantastic? But it's not. It remains just out of your grasp. You think, well, maybe, but no. Same goes with conventional explanations. There were those that were absolutely adamant this was Project Mogul. But when you look at the files of Project Mogul, the balloons that were due to be released that day weren't released because there was bad weather. And of course, what happened in Roswell was supposed to have happened during a thunderstorm. So that would kind of make sense. Same with the V-2 rockets that were, recovered from the Germans at the end of the Second World War. They were all accounted for, nothing went astray. There's no atomic bombs fallen where they shouldn't have done. So you can't put your finger on any one thing that will say this is definitely is. What you have to do is just look at the evidence for yourself and reach your own conclusion. And hopefully that someday, somewhere, something will turn up that will finally, say, well, it's that, whatever that may be.
There actually have been, and may now be present in the Earth's atmosphere, strange aerial objects. Some are of a geometric order. Others can only be described as brilliant light sources. Their form cannot be determined. So far, science has not been able to explain them satisfactorily as natural phenomena.
We've been circling over Washington for more than an hour, passing through the exact points in the sky where strange objects have been seen. As it grows darker, conditions are improving. If during the next half hour there are any reports on these mysterious blips, we're going to head straight for them. Stand by.
Hello? This hood supposed to be on here? Well, I identified myself as the director of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, which for 12 years has been carrying on a private research into UFOs with the intention of trying to get the facts and present them to Congress, the press, and the public. I won't call it a conspiracy because that would mean that they were immediately at the start making an arrangement with the Air Force. I think that possibly the Air Force was aware of Dr. Condon's negative attitude and did not think that he was going overboard toward a positive answer. I think that this report is extremely flimsy. It's such a meager operation. It evades a number of cases in which the Air Force itself said there was no explanation. I'm going to introduce first Dr. McDonald for a brief statement, and Dr. Saunders, and then we'll throw it open for questions.
It began to hit me that Dr. Condon has apparently not read his own material very carefully, and that would, again, I'm afraid, be consistent with his general remoteness from what really went on in the project. I say that because when we tallied First of all, the 59 major cases numbered and identified in the report, we found that the percentage of unexplained cases with which the Condon Committee is left at the end of their scrutiny is 5 to 6 times larger than the percentage of unexplains that Project Blue Book, Air Force Project Blue Book, has been talking about for the last 10 years. They have said 1 to 2, 3%. The number has varied from year to year, Project Blue Book. Of the 59 cases, a fraction of about 1/6 are unexplained in this sample. Furthermore, in a sample of 35 that's in another part of the report, Gordon Thayer, a very competent radar propagation and optics man, has gone through, 20% of those cases are unexplained. So here we have a strange situation of the Air Force going along saying for 15 or so years that the unexplained percentage is only 1 or 2%. My own view of the problem is that it ought to be about 25 or 30% when you look at the Air Force cases. But giving Dr. Condon this assignment, and he goes through the whole thing, and you do an actual tabulation, which he doesn't seem to have done, and you find his percentage of unexplains is 5 to 6 times larger than the Air Force. And yet, what is his principal recommendation? The principal recommendation that Dr. Condon has come through with is there's nothing of scientific interest that warrants further attention on the part of the federal government here in any major way. He recommends dropping the whole problem. I looked at their files. Interviewed now about 400 or 500 witnesses, have been at it a couple of years, and I am one scientist who has been forced farther and farther to the position that the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but I underscore that word hypothesis, is the most probable hypothesis. I'm ready to throw it over when I see something that categorically rules it out, but this is my position.
I feel that over a period of time, a couple of years now, that I have been in a position to look at some of the evidence, and certainly I have not seen all of the evidence that might be pertinent. I too have been driven in the direction of recognizing that there are cases that are not explainable in conventional terms. This at least leaves us with the existence of a real UFO. Beyond that, there is the question of whether some of these real UFOs may be under intelligent control. Again, at the present time, I would say that I have seen evidence that is readily interpretable in such terms, but which may also be susceptible of other interpretation.
I talked with Dr. Condon so many times, and he said he was always misquoted, but every time he was misquoted, it was always in the one direction. We also have statements from people who were present at the meeting. One of them is a scientist where he told a lot of these funny contactee stories and so forth, and the scientist said that at no time gave any indication of a serious approach to it, and it was obvious if he kept on that way it was going to be a negative report.
I happen to have spent some time in the past year making a study of the nature of the kinds of points of view that one can have toward this problem. My conclusion in that area is that there are in fact 5 different points of view that one can have towards this problem. One of these I would label as prejudiced. A second one I would label as being party line. A third one I would label as being skeptical, and by that I mean open-minded. A fourth one would be that point of view of the believer, and a fifth one is the point of view of the contactee. Contactee, the individual who operates on the assumption that it is possible to communicate with the occupants of flying saucers or UFOs or whatever you choose to call them. Now, within this framework, we can recognize 2 points of view which are generally opposed to the reality of the UFO phenomenon, and 2 points of view which start from the assumption that the phenomenon is real. And 1 point of view, which I listed in the middle, which starts from the assumption that reports are real and may contain information that is of some potential value. Now, I've been asked to identify myself, and by now it should be obvious that I would prefer to be regarded in that middle point of view. The believer is someone who accepts the idea that there are real UFOs and directs his attention to the question, why are they here? What are they doing? What do they want from us? What are their motivations? There is the assumption of intelligence or intelligent control, but not necessarily the assumption of direct communication between these intelligences and our own intelligence.
A non-believer would be someone who did not believe at all in anything connected with UFOs, same way I used to be, thought it was nonsense, complete nonsense. It took reading hundreds of reports and talking with hundreds of witnesses, many pilots and others, before I was convinced. Now let's say that, all right, you don't have to prove the extraterrestrial answer, but here are reports that prove there have been devices under intelligent control, seen, tracked by radar, sometimes simultaneously tracked by 2 radar stations to get a fix on it. Now, 1 is often enough, but when you get 2 that confirm identically what is seen visually, that's a pretty tight case. Now, the most probable answer was observation by extraterrestrial beings or controlled machines making observations of the Earth. Now, this is exactly what the Air Force said in 1948. They've had a top secret estimate of the situation which said that these things were interplanetary devices. And they've denied it for years, but finally it was admitted in a letter to one of our subcommittee chairmen.
Even if there was such a letter, it in essence was unimportant because it represented lower level thinking that was overruled as not being well supported at a higher level.
It was overruled because the chief of staff said that it was certainly risky to put out such a statement when you could cause a lot of excitement and perhaps even panic. You have no answers to what the things might be, whether there was any hostility involved, and I don't know of any evidence there is, but at least it was overruled. But the point is that they denied it all that time. If the National Academy of Sciences had put 1/10 as much time into investigating these things and collecting reports from competent people, I mean daylight sightings of machines, not merely lights seen at night in the sky, formation, changing formation, radar scopes showing the formations and showing objects switch from one to the other, all of which were immediately classified by Air Force regulation. If they'd spent any time looking into it, they wouldn't have made that statement. Now, I was a skeptic too. It took me almost a year before I stopped laughing about it. What it should boil down to is this: an open investigations, independent of any government agency. Maybe the government would have to provide some, but there should be some way of making it open so there would be no chance for charges of being biased, to find out what is back of this.
Have we been contacted by extraterrestrial life? There is no right or wrong answer to that question. We could have been, quite possibly. We've talked about Roswell. That could have been, our first contact with extraterrestrial life. It could be that extraterrestrial life is so far in advance of us that it's here all around us that we as a species are just too dumb to recognize it. It could be, as the ancient astronaut theorists proposed, that the Earth was visited millennia ago and that the gods that we've worshipped down the decades, down the millennia, were in fact not gods at all, but they were beings from another star system, chariots of the gods, ancient astronauts. There is no definitive proof for any of these, but it certainly does give you food for thought. The things that floats around UFO research, be it here in the UK or overseas, is, are the governments, the major governments of this world, keeping secrets from us that we have indeed made contact with beings from another world? Well, we know that governments do keep secrets. It's part of what they should do. It is their job to keep certain things secret. In my opinion, I think they keep secrets of UFO sightings. I think we can prove that quite easily. But I personally believe that the governments are not hiding any secrets of alien contact, that in fact one of the reasons they do keep certain UFO events secret is because they are as puzzled and as baffled as the rest of us. The things that make us, the chemicals that make us and our Earth, they are in abundance, you know, throughout the universe. So there is no reason why life shouldn't exist elsewhere. It's probably mathematically impossible for it not to exist. That doesn't mean, of course, that it's contacting us here on Earth, here and now. As our science stands at the moment, the visible universe is 48 billion light years across. And within that universe, there are an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. Whether you are a believer, for example, in a deity, a god of some kind, and believe in creation, or whether you believe in Charles Darwin and evolution, whichever way you look at it, for us to be alone here on this planet is an awful waste of space. You know, and I think it's highly improbable that we are the only life in this huge universe. You know, we don't want to know that perhaps it's a rare form of natural phenomena, or that we are having some kind of illusion when we see things. Belief in extraterrestrials is no different, in my opinion, to belief in a God. You know, there's no proof that God exists, but nonetheless, millions of people, if not billions, do believe in a deity of some kind. It is the most fantastic idea, but it's certainly the most popular. As the days go by, we're finding more and more extrasolar planets. We're finding out more about our own solar system. I think if you were a gambling man, you'd lay odds that the planet Mars at one point did host life, albeit maybe just bacterial life, but life nonetheless. The question is, are UFOs ET vehicles visiting the Earth? That's an even bigger question. The proof for that is not yet there. There's a lot of evidence, but not proof. So I'll continue along until perhaps, you know, I'm convinced one way or another. The biggest truth about Roswell is that something did crash there. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, they all agree on one thing, that something crashed at Roswell in early July 1947. The other big fact is that the United States Air Force have changed their explanation for what happened at Roswell at least 3 or 4 times. So that's a real fact. And it makes you wonder if they're going to change it again at some point in the future. Well, we shall see. When you look at the ways and the reasons why the United States authorities have changed their explanations for what happened, it's always been as a result of what the UFO researchers have uncovered. So they've changed their explanation to try and do away with the information that's been uncovered by colleagues of mine in the States and things like that. One of the things they always denied at Roswell is that there was no bodies there. This was Project Mogul. There was no bodies, no dummies. It was just equipment that was used on it. However, after the alien autopsy had been shown around the world, they came up with an explanation for the bodies for the first time, saying these were anthropomorphic dummies used for parachute testing. But they weren't used until the early 1950s, so they even got the wrong decade with that. When you see these dummies, they look pretty much like you and me. They're just made of wood. They came up with an explanation because of what was happening elsewhere in UFO research. We're just a bunch of warring tribes, aren't we? So if you were flying past, would you really want to call in amongst this mayhem? Perhaps not, which is a shame, because when you see the Earth from space, it is a beautiful looking place. It really is. It does look like paradise. Something did crash at Roswell. You know, even the authorities in the US admit that. The thing about Roswell is that it's a bit of a dilemma, because you cannot find any man-made item, vehicle, balloon, rocket, whatever, that would account for what happened and account for the eyewitnesses' testimony or what they described. On the other hand, when people claim that alien bodies were found, when you examine their testimony, it's usually second or third hand testimony, and it just doesn't add up. It's just out of your grasp. So even if you're a skeptic, you can't positively prove it was a balloon or a crashed rocket from White Sands, or if you believe it was an extraterrestrial. Again, you haven't quite got that proof. So you lie somewhere in the middle, and that's why people still continue to research it, of course. From a skeptical approach, when you look at Roswell, the skeptics have hung their hat on Project Mogul. And they'll even say it was Project Mogul launch number 4, I think. But when you look in the archives for that particular launch, it was cancelled because of the poor weather conditions. So even Project Mogul was just a balloon, or an array of balloons. The only thing that was secret about it was what it was looking for, what it was testing for. The actual equipment that it used wouldn't fool anybody, and Major Marcel, who was the first on site, had not long finished his training in using weather balloons, so he knew what balloons looked like, and he certainly wouldn't have been fooled. There are those that believe that at some point, either the President of the United States or the UN will admit that Roswell was X, Y, or Z. In fact, the only US president to ever mention it in public was Bill Clinton, and it was at a speech he did in Belfast many years ago, and it was in result to some young man writing to him. So he mentioned it in his speech in public.
I got a letter from 13-year-old Ryan from Belfast. Now, Ryan, if you're out in the crowd tonight, here's the answer to your question. No. As far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And Ryan, if the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know.
I doubt we'll ever hear any official statement other than what we already have. All the first-hand eyewitnesses to the events have all gone. They've all passed away. So the chances of finding anything new are slimmer than ever, but we never know. We'll keep on looking for that missing link, the Holy Grail, the Rosetta Stone, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's lying in somebody's filing cabinet somewhere. I'm always hopeful. I'm always positive. Things do turn up, so we remain ever optimistic. My whole take on the alien autopsy film and new leaks, new evidence and so on takes me back to when I first met Spiros Malaris. Now, Spiros didn't know me from Adam, and I told him there and then that this film will never go away, it will never die. And he thought I was nuts. But now he agrees with me. It will never go away, it will never die. No matter what happens. There are those, as I've said, believe it's real, that Ray Santilli has been silenced. So even if Ray stood up tomorrow and said, I'm sorry guys, but it really was a hoax, and Spiros Malaris and John Humphreys and co really did make it, and it was filmed in a flat in Camden, and Keith Bateman did indeed make the tent footage in a farm in Bedfordshire, there would be those that would not believe him. They would say he's been got at, and he's been forced to say this, and it's all disinformation. So that just makes me sigh. It makes me really sad, and it makes me think, why did I bother for those 14 years. One of the reasons why I bothered, that we've not quite mentioned, is that I, at one point, was called Ray Santilli's accomplice. So it became a personal matter for me. On a personal basis, I'm more than happy that eventually I did indeed get to the bottom of it, as I sat one day and told Ray Santilli I would, and told him to his face, and he just smiled and said, okay. So, you know, I can be quite pleased with myself that I did get to the bottom of it. It just took me a lot longer than I expected. When I first became interested in the UFO subject, I had a number of questions, but one overrode them all, and that was, were UFOs real?
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
A simple enough question, one you would have thought could be answered in no time at all. How naive was I? I'd pretty much given up on the paranormal at that point because it always seemed to be out of your grasp, nothing physical. And I wanted something that I could study and put under a microscope. And after all these years of research and investigation, when we look at the Roswell incident, as it's more commonly known, it could well be that that is the best case that has the best answer for showing that perhaps in the desert of Roswell, New Mexico, in 1947, we had first contact with beings not of this earth.
Well, there you are. Is that convincing that we have interplanetary visitors in our midst?